Okay, here we go. 5, 4. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Cedar Creek. Normally I would say it's good to see you, but I don't see you. I'm here with just the tech guys. And my wife, Sue, started to feel poorly Tuesday night, and we think she might have COVID. We don't know for sure. We took a test, but we haven't gotten the results back. But we thought better safe than sorry. So I'm recording the message here Saturday morning, and you folks are here Sunday, or you're home watching it. And I'm glad to be with you, even if it's that way. We are continuing a series that we started a few weeks back. It's called 2022 Best Practices, Building a Solid Base for Your Spiritual Life. And what this is we're talking about 4 basic things that you and I can do that will help us to build a strong spiritual life. And it's kind of like there's all kinds of things that you can do, that you do every day, you do repetitively. And the thing you do in and of itself isn't the goal, it's what those things produce. For example, it's like food. If you want to be healthy, if you want your body to be healthy, well, one of the ways that you do that, one of the big things that you do, is you think about your food. What food do I eat? What food don't I eat? How much food do I eat? When do I eat my food? So there's these things that you do every day relating to food. But the food in and of itself isn't the goal. The goal is I want to be healthy. I want my body to be well nourished. I want my body to be functioning right. The food can be fun. The food can be, sometimes it's work, sometimes it's not. But the food is helping you to get to another goal. Does that make sense? These 4 practices are things that you do spiritually every day that help you to get to a healthy spiritual life. And so those 4 different things that we've talked about. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the first one, and it was the Sabbath. And it's rest and focus, and this idea of a Sabbath. Last week, we talked about a quiet time, or reading and praying, listening to God and talking to God. Today, we're going to talk about fellowship, interacting, kind of living with, relating to people. Next week, we're going to talk about evangelism, but specifically the idea of mission and serving. So these 4 things, these 4 practices that you and I, things that we can do regularly, systematically, in and of themselves, sometimes they're hard, sometimes they're joyful, often it's a combination of the 2, but they're all building something. They're helping us to get to a point where we can live in this world spiritually well. We can be healthy spiritually. We can be strong spiritually. Our spiritual life can be healthy, can be strong. Just like we want our physical life, our physical bodies to be healthy and strong and functioning well, our spiritual life can as well. But every week we started this series, the very first week before we ever got into any of these 4 practices. We recognized that this begs a question, and the question it begs is, do you want a strong spiritual life? If you don't want a healthy body, you're not going to care about exercise or eating well or anything like that. If you don't want a strong, powerful, healthy spiritual life, well, these things that we're talking about really aren't going to resonate with you. They're not going to make a whole lot of difference to you. And it begs a second question. The first one was, do you want a strong, healthy spiritual life? The second question is, what is a strong, healthy spiritual life? So every week before we've gotten into the practice that we're going to talk about, we've kind of taken a step back and tried to answer those 2 questions. And the very first week, when I introduced this series, I asked the question, do you want a healthy, strong spiritual life? And I answered the question for myself. That's a question every one of us has to answer on our own. I can't answer that for you. I can't make you want or not want a strong spiritual life. This is something that each one of us, as we stand before God, as we interact with God, we have to ask and answer that question ourselves. So at the introduction, I answered the question for myself. Do I want a healthy, strong, powerful spiritual life? I said yes, and I had several reasons for it. One of those reasons was found here in Proverbs 29 verse 2. I'm sorry, that's not true. It's Proverbs It's not 29:2. That's the wrong reference, but the verse is right. It says, when the righteous thrive, the people rejoice. Okay, that's your assignment for this afternoon. You go find the real Proverbs reference to that, because it's not Proverbs 29:2. But the verse is right. When the righteous thrive, the people rejoice. So that, to me, helps answer both of those questions. Do I want a strong, healthy spiritual life? And what is a healthy spiritual life? That first one, do I want it? Yes, I do, because if I am healthy and strong and growing spiritually, it's a blessing to the people around me. That's what that verse says, when the righteous thrive. When people who have a healthy, growing, strong spiritual life, when they're doing well, when that's happening, when there are people around who are healthy spiritually, it says that the people around them rejoice. It's like taking... This is a bad example. It's like taking a puppy and putting it in the middle of a bunch of 5-year-olds, and just everybody's happy. When spiritually strong people in the world are a good thing for everybody else in the world. I want to be one of those healthy spiritual people because it's a blessing to everybody around me. And I don't know what that sounds like to you. If that sounds arrogant, I don't mean it to be arrogant. I think it's just true. That's what that verse says. And it's exciting to think that, wow, the people can rejoice when there's someone who's righteous there, when there's someone who's spiritually healthy. The people around that person rejoice. Well, that's cool, but what's really cool is I can be that person. You can be that person. This is not something that's only for a few. God says anyone who knows him can be one of those healthy spiritual people, one of those righteous people, so that as you live your life here on earth, you can be a blessing to the people around you. So do I want a strong spiritual life? Absolutely, because it makes me a blessing to the people around me. But this verse even helps, I think, answer the question, what is a strong, healthy spiritual life? And there's a lot in that, and we've explored a little bit of that every week. But the word righteous there, I think, gives us an understanding, or if we think about that word, it helps us to know what we mean when we say what is a healthy, strong spiritual life. And righteous is a word that has probably a bad reputation. Honestly, it's a word that it's the way we use it the most is self-righteous. That's how we normally use that word, and that has a bad connotation. If someone is self-righteous, the connotation is, well, they think that they're better than other people. They think that they're always right. And righteous can also seem like an impossible, burdensome standard. Oh my gosh, I have to be righteous. That means that I have to do everything right, and I'm under the magnifying glass, and I'm being looked at all the time. And so when we say the word righteous, it's almost like, man, that's scary, it's impossible, and I don't even know if I want it. Well, I think that's because we're misunderstanding what the word righteous means. I'm going to define it here. And you can take this for what it's worth. I'll try to explain why I believe what I'm saying. I do not think that righteous equals perfection. Righteous does not equal perfection. And I think that's good to remember. Doesn't mean if I say I'm righteous, it doesn't mean that I'm perfect. If I say you're righteous, or if I say you should be righteous, it doesn't mean that you should be or are perfect. None of us are perfect. None of us are always right. None of us are always at a place where we know exactly what we should do. And even if we did know what we should do, none of us always do it. You know what I mean? None of us are perfect. And that's not what righteous means here, because God understands that we're not perfect. In fact, in the Psalms, I don't have this verse here, but in the Psalms, David asked the rhetorical question, is there anyone that's righteous? And then he answers the question, no, not one. No one is perfect if that's the standard. None of us always do the right thing. And yet, God said there in Proverbs that when the righteous thrive, the people rejoice. So somehow, even though we can't be perfect, we can still be righteous. So what does righteous mean? Here's how I'm going to describe or define righteous as it relates to you and I having a strong, healthy spiritual life. And it's this: I'm not perfect, but I'm forgiven and I'm growing. I'm not perfect, but I'm forgiven and I'm growing. And if that's the definition of righteous, well, then I can attain that. That's not arrogant. It starts off with I'm forgiven, which means that I've messed up. If I'm going to be forgiven, it means because I haven't been perfect. But I'm forgiven and I'm growing. Take a look at this verse in 2 Peter chapter 1. I like this verse. I probably talk about this verse a lot. I'm going to read here, starting with verse 3. It says, His divine power has given us everything we need for life and godliness through our knowledge of Him who called us by His own glory and goodness. Through these, He has given us His very great and precious promises, so that through them you may participate in the divine nature and escape the corruption of the world caused by evil desires. There's a lot in there, but basically what it's saying is, listen, if you are a Christian, His divine power, that's God. God's divine power has given us everything we need for life and godliness. And I don't have this on the screen, but that verse continues, through our knowledge of Him who called us by His own glory and goodness. That's Jesus, I think. In other words, this is what that is saying. Listen, you and I are sinners. We were created by God to know Him. We rebelled against Him. We fell into sin. Our sins separated us from God. God loved you so much that He sent His Son, Jesus. God Himself came into the world, took on a body like yours and mine, sacrificed that body to pay the penalty for your sins and my sins. If we accept that payment, it says that we are born again. It says that the old is gone, the new has come. Our spiritual life, this spiritual life that we've been talking about this whole time, it springs back into life where it was dead before. And so now we are connected again with God. It's like we've been born back into a relationship with Him. As that new creation, as that new spiritual being, we have the ability to do things that we didn't have before. God gives us, His power has given us what we need for life and godliness here. In other words, as we live our life here, because we're Christians, just because Christ died on the cross and because we accepted it, we are now brought back into God's family, and that fact gives us the path forward to be a spiritual person, to have a strong spiritual life, to be that righteous person. And it starts with, I'm forgiven. Being forgiven puts me in a position where I can then begin to grow. And that's where the rest of this verse goes on. It says, okay, I've been forgiven, so now I am alive spiritually. I am connected with God again. And I can walk a different path in this world than I would have before. And it goes on to say, for this very reason, for all of what we just said, make every effort to add to your faith. And then it lists a bunch of things: goodness, knowledge, self-control, perseverance, godliness, brotherly kindness, love. And then it finishes with this: for if you possess these qualities in increasing measure, they will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive in your knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. So that's the growing part. The first part is the forgiven. What does righteous mean? I'm forgiven because Christ paid the penalty for my sins and I accepted it. That puts me in a right standing with God. It gives me something innately inside of me where now I can grow spiritually, but then I need to grow. I need to add these things in increasing measure. So I start as a child and I grow up to a man. That's what righteous means. Not perfect, but forgiven and growing. One more verse about this is it's interesting how this understanding, this definition of righteous, really takes into account the fact that we're living in both of these worlds, the physical world and the spiritual world. We've talked about that a lot in this series, how that is something that's happening. We're living physically while we're living spiritually at the same time. And we want to lean into that spiritual world, have that part of us be growing and strong and healthy as we're living our life physically. This idea of righteousness, the way I've been talking about it, really leans into both of those. Here in Galatians chapter 5, verse 22, this is a very famous verse. It says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. A lot of the same things that we just saw in 2 Peter 1. A lot of the same qualities. but it says that those are the fruit of the Spirit. So in 2 Peter, we're told, hey, you work hard, make every effort to increase in those things, but recognize while you're doing it, it's the fruit of the Spirit. So we're growing in righteousness in this physical world, but we're doing it as we're connecting with the Spirit in the spiritual world. So that's, to me, helps me to answer the question, do I want a strong spiritual life? Yeah, I do. So I'll be a blessing to others if I'm righteous. What is it? Well, this idea of righteousness, being forgiven and growing, helps me to do it. All right. So now, with that beginning, we're going to jump into our third practice, our third thing that we can do. We talked about a Sabbath. We talked about a quiet time, reading and praying. Today, we're going to talk about fellowship. And fellowship, again, this is a word that you hear mostly in church. But it's worth defining here a little bit. The word fellowship that shows up in the New Testament more than any other, it can be translated different ways. Basically, it means, in big picture terms, being a partner with someone or a companion. It's actually oftentimes translated communion, believe it or not. Instead of the fellowship of the people, it was the communion of the people. And again, communion, we think of communion as the thing that we do when we take the bread and the cup, and it is. But communion really, the root of that is commune, and what that means is not. It just means that people coming together and existing together. So in essence, what this term fellowship means is it's a relational connection. We're going to boil it down. The most understandable, I think, definition that I can come up with at partner, communion, companion, fellowship, it's a relational connection. You and I and others, we have some kind of a connection that is relational. It's not too distant. It's different than my family, perhaps, but we have a relational connection. And here, in 1 John chapter 1, verse 3, says this: we proclaim to you, this is John, who was one of Jesus' disciples, speaking to Christians long after Jesus had died and raised again and gone back to heaven, and now John is out telling people about it, and he says this: we proclaim to you what we have seen and heard, so that you also may have fellowship with us. And our fellowship is with the Father and with His Son, Jesus Christ. That word shows up twice there. John is saying, I want you to have fellowship with us, but what that includes is fellowship with the Father and His Son, Jesus Christ. So when we're talking about fellowship today, as we're trying to define fellowship here today as a practice, something that we can do, it's specifically, I said it's a relational connection, but it's specifically a relational connection focused around God. It's a relational connection with Jesus, with God, and with God's people. That's what this says, I think. If you work this verse backwards, you could say it this way. John is saying, hey, as Christ's sons and daughters, as Christ's disciples, we have a relational connection with God and with Jesus. And we want you to enter into that with us. We want you to have fellowship with us, with me, with my brothers and sisters, with God and Jesus. So fellowship, as we're talking about it here today, this practice, this thing that you can do, is a relational connection, but it's specifically a relational connection with Christ and with believers. What we're going to focus on today is that second part of it, that relational connection with other believers. In Psalm 16, verse 3, this is a psalm I memorized many years ago, and David, this is a psalm of David, and he's saying all kinds of different things in this psalm, but in essence, what Psalm 16 is about is David is looking at his life in a very big picture terms. He takes a step back from his life and says, hey, There's all kinds of ways I could go with my life, but here are what my priorities are going to be. This is really a psalm of priorities. David said, here's my life, and here are the things that are important to me. And here's one of them in verse 3. It says, as for the saints who are in the land, they are the glorious ones, in whom is all my delight. Now, saints is one of those words that you think, okay, a saint is someone who from the 1500s, and they're on a stained glass window in the church or something like that. Saint here, all it means is the chosen ones, or the set apart ones. And what it refers to when the Bible talks about saints, it's talking about those people who have been born spiritually, who have accepted Christ as their Savior. It's talking about Christians. So really what this says is, as for the Christians who are in the land, David says, they are the glorious ones in whom is all my delight. In other words, David said, I'm going to put a priority on the people in the world that I know who know God. We see something similar in the New Testament, in the book of Acts. Acts 2, Acts is a story of the very first church, or churches. Acts is the book right after the Gospels, so the four Gospels explain the life of Jesus from the time he was born until the time he died and went to heaven. The book of Acts picks up the story then of his disciples and what happens right after that, and we see the formation of the church, of local churches, and really in a big way that's the focus of Acts. And here in Acts chapter 2, starting with verse 42, it kind of describes what that church looked like when those people gathered together, what these new Christians, as they interacted with each other, what it looked like. And here in verse 42, it says, they, the Christians, devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. And it goes on to say more things. But there again, we see that there's this devoting themselves to something. One of the things they devoted themselves to is what? The fellowship. This relational connection with people who know God. So, here's how I am defining fellowship for purposes of this message today, for purposes of this basic practice, this thing that you can do. Fellowship is this. It's growing in meaningful relationships with other local Christians. Just tried to boil this down. When I say fellowship, something that you and I can do in 2022 that will help us build a strong spiritual life, that will build a base in us that will encourage us and help us to become healthy and strong and powerful spiritually, is this. We can grow in meaningful relationships with other local Christians. There's a lot in there. There's a lot in there. And so rather than try to parse that out bit by bit, let's do this. Let's transition and ask the question, okay, if that's the definition of fellowship, all right, there are local Christians, people that I see on a regular basis. Many of them are right here in this church. You look side to side, and you're going to see a bunch of them. If you're in a small group, you see them there. There's different places where we have interactions with Christians, people who know the Lord, here on a somewhat regular basis. What is it about building relationships with them that is going to help me become strong and spiritual? Well, there's several things, more than we can talk about. Let's just look at some. One of the reasons why this is so important is building these relationships with other Christians offers us a lot of protection, and we need it. We need protection because it is not easy to be spiritual in this world. In Hebrews 3:13 it says, "But encourage one another daily, as long as it is called today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness." You know, we have things physically that conspire to make us physically unhealthy, don't we? There are things physically in the world that conspire against us to make us physically unhealthy. One of them, unfortunately, is just time. The older you get, the more vulnerable your body gets. But even without that, there's plenty of things that conspire to make you unhealthy. In my life, two of them are eBay and donuts. You know, I can just sit in my chair and look at stuff that I might want to buy that I probably won't, and eat donuts. And if I do that long enough, it's not going to help me be healthy. Now, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with some eBay and some donuts, but the point is we know that there are things that if we just kind of indulge ourselves, it's pretty easy to indulge ourselves in things that are going to make us unhealthy physically. It is exactly the same spiritually. We don't see it, and we tend to discount this, but the absolute truth is that you have forces working against you. There are forces working against you to make your spiritual life weak and sick and ineffective. One of them is your own sinful nature. When we accepted Christ, I'll back up. When you and I first sinned, I don't quite understand this, and I don't know that any human does, but somehow you and I are born with a propensity to sin. It's a sinful nature. This thing, sometimes the Bible calls it the flesh. But there's something in me that wants to rebel against God. Even as his son, even as a man who has served God for decades, who sees the goodness. I believe God is good. I desperately want to grow closer to God. I want to honor my Father. I want to be strong spiritually, and yet something kind of alongside of me is saying, nah, don't do that. And I can't get rid of it. I don't think I'm going to get rid of it till I leave this earth and leave this body. But while I'm here, it's kind of like time. You can't stop time from happening, and it's going to conspire to make your body weak. You cannot stop sin from trying to nudge you or tackle you or drag you into spiritual unhealth. We have an enemy, the devil. He's real. The Bible talks about him. Says that he prowls around looking for someone to devour, and that someone is you. There are things that conspire to make us unhealthy spiritually. Sin. This verse says that one of the protections against this is what? Encourage one another daily so that you won't become hardened by sin's deceitfulness. There's something about talking to other Christians about your life, encouraging each other. Hey, how you doing? Isn't God good? I don't know what that looks like. Looks like a lot of different things for you. Greg Follansby and I spend a lot of time together, and we'll almost always end up talking about how good God is. In some way, it'll just come up. The more you just talk to other Christians, it's like, oh yeah, that's right. God, you are good, and I have a choice. And you help me to focus on what's real. You help me not to just sit on the spiritual couch of my life and eat the spiritual donut of my own sinful, foolish desires. There's a protection in fellowship. If you want to have a strong spiritual life, I need other local Christians because they can help me from becoming hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. Here's another one. There is instruction. We can instruct each other. I like this verse in Romans 15:14. Paul says to the people in the church in Rome, Paul's never seen these people before, but he says this, I am convinced, my brothers, that you yourselves are full of goodness, complete in knowledge, and competent to instruct one another. I think inherent in that is the understanding that I need to be instructed by you. I need to be instructed by the Christians around me. There are a lot of things that I don't see. My strengths and weaknesses are what they are. My experiences are what they are. And so I need people to speak to me to help me to understand things that I don't understand. And one of the big things God says is, you know what? My brothers, you guys are full of goodness, complete in knowledge, and competent to instruct me. I'm full of goodness, complete knowledge, competent to instruct you. That doesn't mean we're perfect, remember? Full of goodness, complete in knowledge doesn't mean I know everything and you should just listen to me. It's not that at all. It's God is speaking to me, God is speaking to you. Together we understand him. You can instruct me, I can instruct you, but I'm not going to get that from people who aren't God's children, who don't have God's Spirit, who aren't growing spiritually. I need instruction, but not any instruction. Godly instruction, that comes from you guys, from the local Christians around you. There's motivation. Here's a third thing that fellowship does for you, helps you to be strong spiritually. That there is a motivation here in Proverbs 13:20. Says, he who walks with wise grows wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm. I've always thought that it's a maxim of life that you will become like who you hang around with. I told my kids that all the time. you will become like who you hang around with. I just think that's just the way that it is. And I think that's what that verse is saying. I'll read it again here. It says, he who walks with the wise grows wise, but the companion of fools suffers harm. In other words, if you hang around people who are Christians, who are growing spiritually, there's a really good chance that you're going to grow spiritually. It's not a one-to-one, but there's a real good chance. If you hang around people who aren't growing spiritually, there's a real good chance you're going to struggle with it. I think that's what that verse is saying. And I think part of it is there's a motivation. We want to be like the people that we hang around with. And that's not all bad. You know, we think of peer pressure as a bad thing. I'm going to say something that I believe is true. Peer pressure is only bad depending on who your peers are. All peer pressure isn't bad. That's what that verse says. If you walk with wise, you grow wise. Well, that ain't bad. I'm giving in to peer pressure. Yeah, you're better off for it. The issue is not whether you're conforming. You will conform. It's who are you conforming to? Who are your peers? There's a good motivation for you when you hang around with other Christians. Here's a fourth one. There is care and love from Christians around you. You hang around with Christians. I like this verse in Galatians 6:2. It says, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Carry each other's burdens. This way you'll fulfill the law of Christ. As we walk through this life, it can be burdensome, both physically here and even spiritually. There are hard spiritual things that happen. But it says here that if I'm around other Christians, other people on this pilgrimage who are seeking to draw closer to the Lord, who want to be growing spiritually, what they can do is they can carry my burdens, and I can carry theirs. And it's difficult to get to the end. It is hard to give, how do I say this? It is hard to finish well spiritually. It's hard to finish well spiritually. Many people begin sincerely, I believe. They long to know God, and they run hard with God for a long time. But what happens is, the longer you do it, you run into things that you can't explain. You have dreams and expectations that are not met. You grow tired and weary. People around you disappear or fail you. You fail people around you. There are all kinds of things that make us want to quit. There are all kinds of things, Christian, that are going to make you want to stop growing spiritually. Having people who can help pick you up and walk with you when you're at your low point spiritually you have to have that. I believe that we have to have that. You're not going to find that out in the world. You're only going to find it with other Christians who are seeking to grow spiritually as you are. There's care and love. There's another verse. I don't have this one up here. You can look it up later. It's 1 Peter 1:22. I'm going to look it up because I'm going to butcher it if I try to say it myself. I don't think I have it here. Hang on. 1 Peter 1:22. It says, now that you have purified yourselves by obeying the truth, so that you have a sincere love for your brothers, love one another deeply from the heart. You should look up that verse and think about it a little bit. I think what God is saying to us there is, look, there are different levels of commitment and love and loyalty and relationship, I guess. He says, now that you've purified yourself and you have a sincere love for the brothers. In other words, you look around and say, you know what? It's true. I believe it. These people who have accepted God, there is something special about them. And I do want to be with them. But then he says, now I want you to take it up another level. If you're there, you've purified yourself, you have a sincere love for your brothers, now do something else. Love one another deeply from the heart. There is a friend who sticks closer than a brother, it says in Proverbs. I think that's what that's talking about. You can have people who don't leave you, and that you don't leave. Much of this world is filled with relationships that are temporary. And many of them are going to be, and there's nothing we can do about them, and some of them should be, some of them shouldn't be, but they end up being. But I think if you want to have deep, committed relationships that really stir your heart spiritually, you need relationships with local Christians that you can live life with. Does that make sense? I guess I'll leave it there. Care and love comes from other Christians. Here's a fifth thing, a fifth reason why fellowship, building, growing in meaningful relationships with other local Christians, why it helps. Is there support in this? And I've been talking about this a lot. 1 Peter 5:9, it says, resist him. Well, I'll start with verse 8. Be self-controlled and alert. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that your brothers throughout the world are undergoing the same kind of sufferings. There is support in this world. Just strength in numbers. I'm better with you than I am by myself. You're better with the person next to you than you are by yourself. Now, there are so many other things that we could talk about here. In fact, if you look in the Bible, this is something that you might want to do someday. Google one another verses. I did it, and I came up with a list of 55 different verses in the New Testament alone that talk about how we interact with each other. Do this for one another. Don't do this to one another. They're called the one another verses. And if you just Google it, I got a list of 55 verses. And if you read them, it is filled with things like we just talked about. Reasons why fellowship is so powerful, so helpful, so wonderful, so necessary for you if you want to be a healthy spiritual person. We talked about a few. There are many more reasons. I want to end with one more question. We've tried to define fellowship, and what we've said is that it's growing in meaningful relationships with other local Christians. We've tried to describe some of the reasons why fellowship, why that would be helpful, why that is a good practice for you, what it's going to do for your spiritual life. I want to end with, how do you create fellowship? How do you do it? And I thought about this a lot, and I had all kinds of answers. And I chewed on different things that we could do and different tips that you could have. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, yeah, those things can be good, but maybe not all the time, or these things are really helpful in these circumstances but not others, and these things would work great for some people and not for others. But I did think I came up with one constant, one thing that is true of all of us. Every relationship, every circumstance, as you seek to grow in meaningful relationships with other local Christians. How you do it, how you grow in relationships with the person sitting next to you, how you grow in a meaningful relationship with the people in your church, with the people in your small group, that a lot of that is individual to you and the person you're building a relationship with. But there's one constant, I think, for all of them, and that's time. There is no substitute for time together. Relationships are built on communication over time. If you don't spend time together interacting, you will not have a relationship. I want to say that again because I believe that. If you don't spend time together, and while you're together, you're interacting, you're serving together, you're talking together, there is connection, there's communication between you. But if you don't spend time together, you will not have a relationship. There's a verse in Hebrews 10:25. Many of you know this verse. It's probably, you've heard it maybe 1,000 times. It says, let us not give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Let us not give up meeting together. You know, the reason that we're told that is because we have a tendency to give up meeting together for whatever reason. I mean, we're living in a world right now where, you know, there may be some good reasons not to do what you used to do, but this is an admonition to all of us. Let us not give up meeting together. If you want to have fellowship, I believe that fellowship is something that if you do it, it will help you grow in a strong spiritual life. It will encourage and stimulate that spiritual part of you. If you don't do it, if you don't have growing, meaningful relationships with other local Christians, I believe that's going to hinder your spiritual life. And I'm also saying that if you want to have fellowship, you have to choose to spend time with each other. How does that look for you? I don't know. But time together, interacting, is critical. I just don't think there's any other way to build relationships. So, where does that leave us? Well, it's this. I think you and I have been given by God the opportunity, well, I know we have. We've been given the opportunity to be strong and healthy spiritually. That spiritual part of you is going to live forever. My physical side, we spend a lot of time, rightly so, thinking about my physical life. Am I healthy? Am I growing? Am I powerful? Am I effective? Am I productive in this physical world? We think about that a lot. We spend lots and lots of time and energy working toward that, thinking about that. There's nothing wrong with that. But it pales in comparison to the importance of doing the same thing for your spiritual life. Do you spend time and effort building yourself up spiritually? Am I healthy spiritually? Am I making wise spiritual decisions? Is my spiritual life growing? Because your spiritual life is going to last forever and your physical life isn't. If for no other reason, Christian, understand that you are going to live forever in the presence of God as a spiritual being. You are living that now alongside your physical life. So you were born physically, somewhere along the line you accepted Christ and you were born spiritually, and there's a time when those things are overlapping. That's right now. But someday this physical one is going to fall off and this one's not going to. The spiritual one isn't going to. Which one is more important? We think that the physical one is because we see it. We experience it. Our senses engage in it. Part of growing as spiritual beings is seeing the reality of this, experiencing and feeling the reality of our spiritual life. As that happens, we begin to see, wow, this is so much more important. Do you want to grow spiritually? Do you want to be healthy spiritually? I sure hope so. I do. It looks like a lot of things. We do it here while we're living physically. One of the things I think you can do in 2022. And it's probably something that maybe is more pertinent and we need to think about more than ever because of the circumstances our world is in. What does it look like for you to spend time with other local Christians so that you can grow in meaningful relationships with them? Think about that. Ask God what that looks like for you. And then work at it. I think we need it. I think it's a blessing to God. It's a blessing to the people around us. It's a blessing to you. Let's pray. Father, I just thank you that you have given us each other. And Lord, our desire is to see each other and grow with each other as your brothers and sisters, as your sons and daughters. Help us, Lord, to do that. In Jesus' name, amen.